Hi, everybody. This is Michael Schechter welcoming you to another Wednesday Way of Life check-in. I'm very happy that you're joining us, and I hope that you're getting and realizing some success from the Way of Life program so far. You should have already taken a look at this week's materials, which include grocery shopping for success and understanding and reading food labels. And there's some great handouts that go along with that, including a healthy shopping guide that you can use as a list when you take to the grocery store, and instructions about reading a nutrition facts label. This week's daily challenge is to try to sleep for 7 hours each night, and that's going to be the focus of today's webinar, some strategies for healthy sleep. Before we start today's quick talk on sleep, let's talk about how you've been doing so far. By this point in the Way of Life program, you should begin to see some improvements in your lifestyle habits and strategies. You should have determined a daily or weekly calorie budget that allows you to gauge whether or not you're eating the right amount of food. You should be becoming comfortable with including produce picks, fruits and vegetables at every meal, spotting whole grains. And again, this week's video will talk to you a little bit about spotting healthy grains as a source of protection from things like colon cancer and high cholesterol. And I think I've underscored many times the importance of exercise, especially when it comes to improving your calorie burn, managing stress, and general well-being. We've talked a little bit about strategies to understand and control your hunger. We've talked about, in week 2, we talked about that thing called the cognitive triad. We're going to talk a little bit about that today when it comes to sleep. But to understand and control your hunger, we also talked about something called the 4 Ds, which include drinking water when you're hungry, doing something else, determining the source of your hunger, whether it's true physical hunger or more emotional hunger, and finally, deep breathing and the importance of exercise and understanding that a lot of cravings do pass. So these are things that you should be in the process of mastering. And if you need help with those things, give us a call. And our health coaches or registered dietitians would be happy to make an individualized plan for you. Finally, if you're hoping to lose weight through the Way of Life program, I hope that you're experiencing that weight loss. Again, we shoot for modest amounts of weight loss, somewhere between a half a pound and a pound a week. We don't want you to calorie restrict too much. And we want you to build this new lifestyle that will facilitate reasonable weight loss without making you feel too deprived. With that in mind, let's talk a little bit about sound sleep strategies. How a sound sleep and healthy sleep are important not only for general well-being and healthy aging, but also to control your hunger. We know that people who are disrupted in their sleep-wake cycle tend to eat a bit more and tend to be at an increased risk for things like heart disease and high blood pressure. So let's get some basic facts out of the way. First of all, sleep is essential for people, just like food and water is. As a matter of fact, laboratory animals who are deprived of sleep often die quicker than those that are deprived of food. Sleep is a biologically driven phenomenon, and poor sleep can be improved. So I want you to remember all those things. I also have a picture from the National Sleep Foundation regarding the recommended amount of sleep. And I don't know if you've seen in the news recently, but there have been more studies that underscore the idea that 7 hours of sleep seems to be about the right number that adults want to target. So 7 hours of sleep per night is something that really is associated with improved health. Now, when we talk and study sleep, there are basic terminologies that we use, and one is stages of sleep, from light sleep, which we consider stage N1 or N2, to heavier sleep, which is sleep N3 and 4. In addition, there is REM and non-REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movements, and REM sleep is an important component of our sleep patterns and generally responsible for about 25% of our sleep. A few other terms that might be helpful include the idea of sleep latency. That is how long it takes you to fall asleep. So if you go to bed, and you lie in bed, how long does it take for you to begin to enter sleep? And for most people, that should be less than 15 minutes or right in the neighborhood of 15 minutes. Anything longer than that suggests some issue. We talk about total sleep time. That's the time spent sleeping. And sleep efficiency, which is total sleep time divided by the total time in bed. This is, of course, expressed as a percentage, and this is a key concept for treatment of sleep disorders. So to use an example, last night I went to bed at 10:30 and fell asleep at 10:45. That means my sleep latency was 15 minutes. I woke up at 3 a.m. To go to the bathroom, and then I went back to sleep at 3:05. Finally woke up for the morning at 6:30 and got out of bed at 7 a.m. Based on these figures and numbers, my time in bed was 8.5 hours and my time of sleep was 7 hours and 45 minutes. That makes my sleep efficiency 91%, which is pretty good. Targets that we want to look at for most adults under age 65 and over age 18, 90% sleep efficiency is a key. And for older folks, those over 65, 85% is a target for sleep efficiency. So it's helpful to understand your sleep efficiency. And if you're spending too much time in bed, but not asleep, there are some strategies that you may want to use to reduce that time in bed, not asleep. In order to understand and promote healthy sleep, it's important to remember that sleep is determined by what we call a circadian rhythm, an internal clock inside of our heads. And oftentimes we talk about strategies for going to sleep, but circadian rhythms are also involved in activating us and waking us up. Circadian rhythms work through chemical messengers, and the activating response that we have usually comes in response to light hitting our eyes and then brains when we wake up in the morning. So when we get up in the morning, it's a nice thing to expose ourselves to light, and we'll get that activating response through those chemical messengers, cortisol, serotonin, and adrenaline, among others, and that will activate us. Remember, we talked a little bit about the fight or flight system. That's an activating response, and adrenaline and cortisol are the chief chemical mediators of that activation. On the other hand, the deactivating response is also orchestrated by certain chemical messengers, things like melatonin, which you may have heard about in terms of sleep studies, GABA stands for gamma alpha butyric acid, and other chemical messengers. And it's important to remember that just like the stimulating response, which can be activated by exposure to light, there are certain strategies that allow us to activate the deactivating response, if that makes sense. So remember that these chemical messages come from our brain. And there are certain descending pathways that allow us to be activated or relaxed. And we'll talk about this more when we talk about meditation and relaxation strategies in future weeks. But the nervous system has two parts. It has the sympathetic part that's activating and the parasympathetic part that's deactivating and is responsible for our sleep. Now, the parasympathetic system is also called the rest and digest or heal and restore system. And I listed 9 things that you can do to actually activate this parasympathetic nervous system. Breath work, Things like yawning, not surprisingly, because we yawn when we're tired, meditation, visualization, yoga, music, calming thoughts, hugs, touch, massage, things like that, all activate that side of the parasympathetic nervous system and are helpful in helping us wind down. Now, when we talk about sound sleep strategies, which is the key thing that we're focusing on today, we should look at different things. We should look at biologic strategies. So again, strategies to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system include going to bed when you feel tired, getting up at the same time every day and exposing yourself to light, avoiding stimulants, so things that can activate us too close to bedtime, including caffeine and nicotine, exercise. I don't know if any of you did the challenge of 10 push-ups, 10 lunges, and 10 squats last week, but I bet you'll find that when you do those, you wake up. So we see that exercise can activate us, so we don't want to do it too close to bed. And finally, spicy meals that can trigger gastroesophageal reflux or GERD also can keep us up. So these are biologic strategies that will help facilitate a shorter sleep latency and more restful sleep. Again, I mentioned biologic strategies already. There are also certain cognitive or mindful strategies that help us fall asleep. This is the cognitive triad that I showed you before when we talked about emotional hunger and our behaviors sometimes fueling our feelings. The same thing can happen in bed. If we associate going to bed with a feeling of dread and start catastrophizing about not falling asleep, then we start tossing and turning and activating ourselves. So again, it's important to let sleep come passively, to not try too hard, to practice letting go of things and turn off our mind, and use breathing techniques or strategies to help stimulate that parasympathetic response at bedtime. There are certain environmental fixes that help that biologic response as well. Being in a dark environment. Again, if you're a shift worker, you often can know how difficult it is to fall asleep when it's light outside. That's because light activates our brain. It's good to have a tech-free bed zone. Remember, the light that comes from our phones or our TVs or our tablets can stimulate that. That stuff is called blue light, and blue light can activate our brain. It's helpful to have a sleep timer on your TV if you want to fall asleep while watching TV. Cool temperatures facilitate sleep, and a lot of people don't know this, but temperatures between 60 and 67 degrees seem to facilitate the deepest sleep. And finally, people like weighted blankets a lot, and this came to us as a suggestion during one of our Wednesday check-ins. And indeed, I use a weighted blanket myself, and I think that is another environmental fix that facilitates that biologic response for sound sleep. We know how helpful winding down routines are from our children. If any of you are parents out there, you usually have a bedtime routine for your child that facilitates a winding down, a quiet time, making sleep interesting, going to bed, and often having a story time with our kids. Well, these kinds of strategies work for adults too. And just because, again, we don't formalize them, sometimes we forget about them. So it's important to have times when you can wind down before bed. If you have a bed partner, it's often helpful to not go to bed angry. Work with your partner. If you're being bombarded either by light or sounds or other things that may keep you awake, work with your partner on minimizing those, and consider all five senses. All five senses should be geared toward that winding down, restful routine. In closing, I want to remind everybody that sleep is as important as food and water to your survival, and understanding your behaviors and habits around bedtime and working on them that stimulate that parasympathetic response will help you achieve better sleep. We'd love it if you'd share your favorite bedtime wind down routines with us so we can add to our collection. You can do that now through the chat function, or you can mention it in a message if you're watching this through YouTube. Finally, I was remiss in not introducing my sort of facilitator here, Lauren Charnas, who is one of our account managers, and she's helping me monitor any chat functions that we have. I don't think we have any chat today, so we'll go on and we will bid you adieu. Before we do, let me remind you that accountability is important, and that's why we want you to track throughout the Way of Life program. Remember, you can only go back 3 days for tracking purposes. And it's important, as I tell you every week, to balance a sense of accountability with a sense of self-forgiveness. So we don't beat ourselves up for falling off the horse. We just get back on and keep working on things. And again, I want to thank you for tuning in today. I hope to see you next week when we'll talk about some other strategies for healthy living. We'll talk a little bit about challenges and questions that you might have if any of them come in through the week. And again, any feedback you can give us on these Wednesday check-ins would be very, very helpful. Since we have no questions or comments today, I will sign off, and I will again invite you to tune in next week. Thanks again for coming, and keep working on Way of Life.